And then, this is the big one. This guy kicked Conquest's ass. You remember that?
Did you? I mean, did you?
Yeah. Factored in a little
He was
bit.
missing all his skin, Mark. I wonder how that happened.
Could Mark actually defeat Conquest alone? Was he truly strong enough? Well, it's complicated. Let me explain. We will have to break down the power scaling and their feats, and then we get to our answer. It may or may not be what you think it is. Let's get into it. Mark Grayson's power feats and strategic growth. You wonder by the time Mark faced Conquest for the final, gruesome time in Invincible 72, his physical parameters had evolved dramatically. Cecil's training, the trials of Season 3, and the relentless beatings Mark took didn't just make him tougher, they fundamentally rewrote his Viltrumite DNA. Remember, Viltrumite's strength doesn't grow linearly, it amplifies exponentially as they survive severe damage and their bodies adapt. Mark, the hybrid, had an accelerated learning curve compared to pure bloods because he was constantly exposed to existential threats. What are his quantifiable feats? We were past the stage of just overturning cars and smashing minor villains. By the time he faced this ultimate Viltrumite challenger, Mark had achieved celestial threat level power. His strength benchmarks are terrifying. He was capable of tackling a high tier Viltrumite like Alan the Alien into the surface of the moon. That requires sustaining significant relativistic speeds and generating massive impact energy. He had demonstrated the immense application of reactive force capable of stopping an asteroid. This feat proves he could actively mitigate or halt large-scale celestial threats. His flight speed, he flies fast enough to reach the moon in seconds and return to Earth from orbit in approximately 2 hours. This isn't just travel, this capability to generate and sustain high velocities translates directly into the kind of devastating kinetic striking power necessary to crack a Viltrumite skull. These metrics establish his kinetic energy reserves as formidable. His resilience too was an absolute asset. Mark's body was capable of surviving orbital re-entry and high-velocity impacts. This capacity to absorb massive trauma was the only thing that kept him alive. But by the rematch, having been pushed to the brink of death, Mark had completed a crucial philosophical shift. He was prepared to move past moral constraints and adopt the ultra-violence required by the Viltrumite ethos. He transformed from a powerful young hero into a desperate lethal combatant. That change in mindset is the invisible advantage that Conquest, relying on his assessment from their previous encounter, would never have factored into his operational plan. To truly appreciate Mark's victory, you must first acknowledge the insurmountable challenge he faced. Conquest is not merely a strong Viltrumite. He is a living legend, a historical figure whose designation is built upon centuries of successful conquests and merciless exterminations. This narrative weight establishes him as a definitive apex predator within the Viltrumite hierarchy. His narrative function is clear. He is the perfect antithesis to Invincible. Let's talk objective power scaling. Quantitative power scaling, often derived from community consensus and comparative narrative position, firmly places Conquest at a level Mark had yet to reach. Based on speculative unit metrics that reflect relative power levels, Conquest is estimated to range between 4080 and 4300 units of power. In comparison, Mark, despite his rapid evolution, would have likely peaked in the 3500-3800 unit range prior to that final fight. This confirms an objective, quantifiable power deficit of 10 to 20% compared to Conquest. Conquest's reputation is explicitly built upon ruthless violence and nearly unstoppable strength, backed by centuries of maintaining unparalleled stamina necessary to wage prolonged multiplanetary wars. This inherent power imbalance forms the bedrock of our 40% failure scenario for Mark. The disparity in combat experience remained immense. The probability of failure is rooted in a purely objective assessment of the combatant's maximum sustainable output and the physiological costs of the fight. Mark was not strong enough to win cleanly or sustainably. The objective raw power gap. As established, Conquest retained a 10-20% raw strength advantage. In a confrontation between two hyperdurable Viltrumites, victory depends on overwhelming kinetic force to inflict catastrophic trauma. If Conquest had immediately abandoned his bloodthirsty posturing and attacked with the cold, lethal efficiency required for a mission termination, Mark would have been overwhelmed quickly. An extended slugfest favors the combatant with superior sustained output, meaning Conquest, who had greater energy reserves and a higher ceiling, would inevitably tire Mark first. The failure condition is the probability that Conquest fights optimally, utilizes his superior reaction time, and focuses on terminating the fight quickly rather than enjoying the process. The severity of Mark's injuries after the final confrontation offers the most compelling objective evidence that he was not strong enough in a sustainable sense. Following the fight, Mark was so severely damaged that he required 2 full months of recovery. This recovery period is extraordinary and far exceeds standard Viltrumite healing factors, which typically allow recovery from most injuries, provided the heart remains intact. Requiring 2 months implies near total systemic shutdown. It suggests Mark's heart sustained severe damage, his brain incurred substantial trauma, or his healing factor was entirely exhausted. When a victory leaves the winner functionally incapacitated and near death for 8 weeks, that outcome must be clinically classified as an unsustainable triumph, teetering on the edge of Pyrrhic failure. Therefore, if Mark's physical condition were the only measure, the 40% failure chance accurately reflects the proximity to death he faced. He was not strong enough to avoid this catastrophic physical cost. The success probability is secured entirely by Mark's psychological evolution and his ability to exploit Conquest's self-imposed tactical restraints. Mark was not stronger, but he was more desperate, and his desperation became his greatest tactical asset. Exploiting the fatal flaw, arrogance, as a critical vulnerability, Conquest's defining character trait, his overwhelming confidence and bloodlust proved to be his ultimate undoing. Conquest made the same mistake as he did in the first fight by not taking Mark seriously. He intended to inflict prolonged psychological trauma and prove his superiority rather than simply executing the kill order. Every moment Conquest spent mocking, torturing, or admiring the damage inflicted was time Mark's superior tenacity could utilize, and time Mark's healing factor could marginally improve his condition. The strategic window for victory was not created by Mark's power but by Conquest's fundamental character flaw, his hubris. The strategic adaptation, commitment to lethal force. The key to victory was Mark's commitment to a lethal strategy, moving beyond the moral constraints of the first encounter. Mark realized that Conquest required absolute elimination, not just submission. The final critical maneuver was Mark strangling Conquest to death in Invincible 72. This tactic is brilliant because it bypasses raw dermal durability. Instead of trying to inflict critical kinetic damage on Conquest's heart through blunt force, an effort that would have exhausted Mark's limited 3800 unit power level, the choke attack applies sustained focused pressure to the neck and throat. This tactic targets the Viltrumite brain's vulnerability. While a Viltrumite brain can sustain a surprising amount of damage and survive without oxygen for a couple of hours, prolonged sustained pressure combined with the extreme damage Conquest had already suffered disabled him from resisting or escaping the hold. Mark willingly entered a potentially fatal grapple, betting that his superior motivation protecting Earth and loved ones would allow him to maintain the squeeze longer than Conquest's arrogance would allow him to fight it off. This was a brutal battle of will, not kinetic superiority. Victory through mutual destruction. Mark's 60% victory probability was the result of a perfect storm. Conquest's psychological error allowing the fight to degenerate into a sustained, close-quarters brawl where tenacity mattered more than peak strength, coupled with Mark's physical peak and his absolute commitment to mutual destruction. Mark achieved victory by successfully surviving the fight. Conquest expected him to lose. The narrative imperative was met, propelling Mark into a new tier of combatant who understands the necessary savagery required to survive his heritage. The final probability assessment. To close this deep dive, we return to the question, was Mark Grayson strong enough to defeat Conquest alone? The answer rests entirely on your definition of strength. If strength is defined solely by maximum objective power, output and efficiency, Mark was not strong enough, 40% failure. His 2-month recovery period is the physical receipt for that truth. If strength is defined as the combination of evolving power, strategic adaptation and psychological endurance, Mark was just strong enough, 60% success. His victory was secured by his willingness to choke his enemy to death and withstand the pain that came with it. He won, not by being the stronger Viltrumite, but by being the desperate one. By exploiting the fatal arrogance of a villain who thought the fight was about power, when Mark made it about survival at any cost. Let me know in the comments below, did Mark's victory truly justify the 2 months of recovery, or should he have focused on a safer, less lethal strategy? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, we're on the path to 10k, and your support helps us break down the greatest power scaling debates in comics.